Hello, and welcome to the Still to Be Determined podcast, the podcast that follows up on topics from the YouTube channel Undecided with Matt Farrell. I'm Sean Farrell. I'm a writer. I'm the older brother and the interrogator of the aforementioned Matt Farrell. Matthew, say hello.
Hello.
Today we're going to be talking about Matthew's most recent episode, which was solar panels for home. Still worth it 2 years later? Question mark?
There's always a question mark.
There's always a question mark. This episode dropped thanks to a typo on October 20th, 202. That's what I wrote down.
202.
This is a very old episode. We're finally getting around to it. So you may remember that St. Paul said of this, Matthew, So this episode, it was a little interesting for me to approach from the perspective of, as the host of this podcast, coming to you and saying like, well, let's talk about this. You lay out everything so clearly and cleanly that I really have very little in response.
Then I did my job.
Yes. And it was interesting because coming through the comments, there was the same sort of response within the comments, which were people like, wow, this was so thorough. Thanks so much. And I was like, God damn it.
Well, there's a reason for that, though. It's because this is the third one in the series.
Right.
The first one I did.
This is the end of the trilogy, right? You're not making
it's the
this
end
a
of the trilogy.
Right.
Until I do the prequels. And then I CG everything in the original ones out and do it all over again.
And then we find out what made the dark panels dark in the first place.
Exactly. Yes. But seriously, the first two videos I did, the way I handled them, I answered a bunch of questions, but I left gaps. And then there were tons of these questions about like, well, what about maintenance? What about care? What about this?
Right.
And so then this one, I took all those questions I had gotten on those previous ones and just rolled it all together to try to make one that was as cohesive as possible, that would get ahead of those questions before people would ask them.
Right. You were able to use the first two as a rough draft almost of creating.
Exactly. Yes. So this one was a more cohesive, well held together, I think.
Which is why one of the comments that caught my eye and it made me laugh was somebody said, well, you just answered my question about dust, dirt, and pollen. Thanks.
Yes.
So into the comments, one that struck me as about as thorough as your video itself was from Jerry Gerardo. Jerry wrote, I had been researching solar for years, and for me, it was never financially viable until a couple of years ago. I had all the same reasons for changing over as Matt. My solar generation is exactly opposite of Matt's here in Florida. We have lots of rain in the summer. You definitely need to see your situation. There are a lot of factors that change the viability of solar. Just do not assume that it does not work for you. Go through all the modeling and financial programs to get to the bottom dollar, and don't forget, we are all needed to do our part to save the planet. Look at how you use power. I lowered my usage by 20% by just auditing our family's usage and making some simple changes. Every little bit helps. That's
one of the comments I've gotten a lot on previous videos is just reduce your energy usage. It's like that only gets you so far, but like he pointed out, if he was able to shave 20%, that's a lot. I mean,
20% is an impressive number.
Yeah, it is. It's really good.
And that harkens back to your older videos about how you do monitor your power usage. And it seems like he's probably done something similar. He says he audited his family's usage.
Yeah, there's many ways that you can do that. Like I use the Sense home meter that tracks everything in my house collectively. But you can also buy these little kilowatt readers at Home Depot for like 15 to 20 bucks. And then you can just plug a single thing in it, plug it in, see how much energy it uses when it's being used, how much energy it's using when it's not being used, because that's one of the biggest drains. You have a television set. When it's turned off, it's actually not off. It's still draining 10 watts or 15 watts of power in a standby mode. So it's like you'll start to find those things around your house, and there's some simple things you can do to cut that down.
I'm curious about what those would be. Like if you've got a television that goes into that kind of standby mode that looks like off and it is still draining power. What can you do in that case other than what our grandfather used to do, which was unplug the television before going to bed?
It's along those lines. Some TVs, they have settings inside of them for energy saving modes and stuff like that. And sometimes it's like the PlayStation is a good example. When you go to turn off your PlayStation and you go to the power menu, it gives you two options: go into standby mode or turn it off. Right. If you're in standby mode, it's still draining power. It's just in a sleep state. But if you power it off, it's off. So it's like some televisions give you that option. There are things that you can buy. They're smart power strips that you plug certain things into certain of the plugs, and it will know if like, I remember I had one of these at work. It actually had a motion sensor on it. So if you turned off your computer and then you left for the night and there was no motion in the area for X amount of time, it would just turn off whatever's plugged into certain plugs. There's other systems that do something similar where it's like you can plug everything in and there's like this one master plug. And if that one thing turns off, everything else on the strip gets turned off. So it's like there's different things that you can do that will help mitigate that. So you could get smart power strips that you plug your entertainment system into. And then when you turn it off, it actually gets turned off because the power strip is just cutting power. So there's things like that. Getting LED light bulbs to replace incandescents, stuff like that. So there's all these different ways that you can trim back your power usage here and there. But then you're going to hit a wall where it's like, I can't cut back more, or I'm really going to start making my life
weird.
Yeah.
From my own experience with motion sensor power usage back, I don't know if you remember this far back, but I used to go into an office for work, and I stopped doing it sometime in, I think it was way back in early 2020.
Or was that 202?
Yeah, it was 202. It was the year 202. My office had motion sensors attached to the lights, and there were more than a few times where I would be the only person in the area, and I would be sitting so still that the lights would turn off.
Yes.
And
it was always
a little embarrassing to have that happen. It was bad enough when at one point in our offices, we had individual offices, and then they did a massive restructuring of the building, and they turned most of the office space into common offices. So went from having an individual office, just me, to now working very closely with all of my colleagues. And it was embarrassing enough to have it happen when you were alone in an office, to be sitting in an office and have the lights shut off and then have to like stand up and walk around to get the lights turned back on. Because nobody would see that. You were in the office, the lights go off, the lights come on, nobody knows what's going on. But to have that happen in a large common area.
No, I got one. I got one better than that, Sean. The office I used to work in Boston, they had something similar in the bathrooms.
Oh, this has happened to me.
Yes.
At least a half a dozen times. And trying to flag a sensor that for some reason the idiots who put the sensors into the room don't put them in the stalls. No. And they are so far around the corner that you can't just like
but now
wave an arm over
you're
the
sitting
door.
In complete darkness.
Yeah.
And you're like, I can't exactly
I can't
clean
jump
things
around.
The way I can't get up and get the lights come back on so I can finish up what I was doing.
Yeah. I had it happen once where the lights went out and I was just like, well, I'm not done yet. So I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing. And then somebody else came into the bathroom to come use the stall. And when they discovered it was locked, they came in, the lights were off, the lights turned on because they came in. They walked to the door, found it was locked, went, what? And I went, I'm sorry, it's occupied. And he was like, oh, okay. And then left.
You're
just
what he must have been thinking of, like, he was just in the dark. Oh my God. That's amazing. Yeah. Oh my God.
Yeah.
I'm crying.
And there's a part of me that thinks this should really be edited out of the podcast, but I don't think I will.
I don't think we should. This needs to be in there. Yeah. Oh my God. Thank you, Sean.
So motion detectors.
They suck.
Pros and cons. They are terrible.
Yes, they are.
They will make you look like a weirdo in front of coworkers.
Did you know that Sean likes to go poop in the dark?
I found our coworker sitting alone in a dark bathroom stall. So another comment was from Fact Not Fiction. And his comment starts, Matt Farrell. Thank you for being honest about the net metering.
Was there more to that? Sorry. Your dramatic pause was like, wait, what?
Thank you for being honest about the net metering. I feel too many people cheat by not pointing out that subsidy. Before I continue with the rest of his comment, I'm going to ask you, can you explain what the net metering is?
Well, it's not a subsidy, but net metering is when you overproduce electricity on your panels, it has to go somewhere. So that goes back into the grid, which means your excess energy is helping your neighbors, the community, because it's adding to the electricity mix of the grid at large. And for when you have net metering, what that means is that you're acting as a power plant. And so the utility is paying you for that energy. And the way they do that is they credit it to your account. So if you put a kilowatt of energy into the grid, they deduct a kilowatt from your bill. That's a 1-to-1 net metering, but not all of them do that. Sometimes they'll only pay you the wholesale price of the energy generation, but not the delivery charge. So if between delivery and supply, it costs you 20 cents, but the energy generation is only 10, you may only be getting back half of that. It varies state to state. It varies by utility. It's all over it's a hot mess across the country because there's no standardization to it. So it really depends on your supplier and where you are. And where I am, it's 1-to-1.
The rest of his comment, then, I'm not sure if I am sure of one thing, that I don't fully understand what is being discussed here.
Okay.
They continued, however, I do wish that you had included a calculation of the value of 1-to-1 net metering. In particular, calculating the payback period if the legislature or the Public Utility Commission changes that tax should be included in your payback timeline graphs. I sincerely doubt that any of your contracts offer to cover that eventuality. As Darren H. points out, Darren H. is another commenter, this is a hidden, regressive, imposed tax on ratepayers, and is so as an issue worthy of debate and clarity on our society's energy policies.
Okay, I think they're missing the point. I think they're conflating two things.
That's what I wondered if that was happening here.
Yeah, I think they're conflating two things. There's the SREC credits, and then there's net metering. And they're two very different things. SREC credits is what he's talking about. That is a legislative thing that like in Massachusetts, they mandated a certain amount of electricity has to come from renewable sources. And then you have utilities that are going, we can't meet that. So we have to be creative about where we can get that from. And one of the easy places to do that is people who install solar panels on the roofs can be part of this solar renewable energy credit system that helps the utilities meet that mandate of they have to produce a certain percentage on the grid by a certain timeline. And the way that they fund this program is that every utility payer is basically paying a little tax, a little extra. And so it works out to like per household, it's in Massachusetts, it's ridiculous. It's like a couple of pennies a month. It's like cents a month per house across the state. And then what that money goes into the fund that pays people who get solar panels installed and apply into the SREC or SMART program, which is what it's called today. They get paid based on the kilowatt size of their system and how much energy they're putting into the grid. There's a little bit of a double dipping here because when you combine SRECs with net metering, it really is double dipping because I have 1-to-1 payback through net metering. So every kilowatt I put in, I get a kilowatt off my bill. And then on top of that, I'm getting paid the SRECs, which is how much energy my solar panels is putting in the system that's getting paid out from that slush fund of the SREC credits. And that has a fixed timeline because it's an incentive program.
Right.
So for me, the SREC program lasts for 10 years. After 10 years, that shuts off for me. But the net metering doesn't go away. So he's conflating two things. He's mistaking net metering for the SREC program.
Net metering is effectively a business deal between you and the power company.
It's like, I am acting as a power plant, and it's no different than the utility buying power from a different place and supplying it to the grid. That's all it is. It's a business transaction. The SREC program is a tax incentive program that it varies state to state. Some places don't even have it. So it's like, it varies all over the place. So when he said I should have been fair and calculated it, I did. In the video, I calculated it at the end, and I said, if I didn't have solar renewable energy credits, my payback period would have been, I can't remember what the years was. I showed it on the graph. I had a graph that showed 2 lines going up. So I did exactly what he talked about. So it's like, I'm not sure I don't think he understood what was going on. I think he got confused.
The last 2 comments I wanted to read are both reflective of sort of bigger picture thinking around solar panels in public life.
Mm-hmm.
Scott Bites wrote, when it's time to replace your roof, get a metal roof. I live in Pennsylvania, and it was the same cost for a high quality metal roof as it was for shingles. I never have to worry about my roof ever again.
What's funny is I've been thinking about that. Like when it comes time for me to replace my roof, or my wife and I have actually been talking about like if we built a home or something like that. It's like I've been eyeballing metal roofs because they last longer than asphalt roofs.
Right.
I have a lot of questions though about like putting solar panels on a metal roof. Does that compromise it in a way that is concerning?
So is the entire roof electrified, or you can see birds just falling?
Yeah.
Squirrels getting smoky and fried as they...
In the middle of the night, it's like a bug zapper. You just keep seeing zzz, zzz, outside
the
window.
Raccoon. And finally, from the comment section from Adam Little, seeing your roof shape / orientation and tree shading, I was reminded of something that occurred to me walking around my neighborhood. Most single-family homes in major cities will have similar issues, and yet this is where you're most likely to find folks with the capital and mindset to invest in solar. Mm-hmm. Seems to me that a solar company might be able to set up deals with local business owners that have large flat roof space available. So rather than investing $20,000 in panels for your own less than ideal roof, you invest $20,000 in panels nearby that can maximize their potential, maybe even on tiltable racks.
Yeah.
That almost sounds, as I was reading it now, I was thinking, well, Adam, I think you just struck upon an entrepreneurial idea, and effectively as an entrepreneur to say, well, what if I made deals with places that have big, wide roofs and paid them a rent fee to be able to put panels on their roofs and then sold that to the electric company? That's a business. So,
and it's actually a business that's actually already starting up. It's called Community Solar. I'm actually starting to work on a video about this. But Community Solar is growing in popularity because not everybody doesn't own their home, or they don't want the upfront expense. And so what you do is you buy into a solar installation that's put somewhere, and by buying into it, you get amount of money knocked off your utility costs. So you get the benefit of a slightly reduced utility bill, but you don't have any of the maintenance issues. You don't have something strapped to your roof, and it's available to pretty much anybody in a certain community. And it's really cool.
Sort of the equivalent of buying stock in a company, right?
Exactly. It's like buying a timeshare, I guess you could almost say. It's something similar to that. It's really kind of a cool concept. And then businesses, there's also incentive programs already, at least in my state, there's incentives for businesses to install solar on their roofs. Because like that SREC program I'm in, it's available to businesses over certain sizes. It's a different program, but there's state incentives for large scale solar installations that people install. The federal tax credit for solar is expiring for homeowners at the end of next year, but for commercial installations, it's forever capped at 10% back. But it's like there's basically going to be a federal tax incentive for commercial installations in perpetuity, unless that's changed by the Congress. So there are incentives already around trying to build out large scale installations that are out there already. Yeah. And if he's definitely not alone in this thinking. And it's like, if he's an entrepreneur, he could get in on this and try organizing some of this on his own and trying to build out a business around it. Cause there's definitely something there.
I've noticed solar panels popping up on business roofs in Brooklyn, which these large empty spaces on the top of in some cases, warehouses. There's a large supermarket near here, and solar panels are starting to pop up on these things. And you can also sometimes identify solar panels that have been put on the roofs of brownstones in my neighborhood because they put them up on, they don't mount them directly to the roof. They put them on their own stand.
Mm-hmm.
So they end up looking almost like a canopy. So you can walk in our neighborhood and on top of some of the brownstones, you see these structures that look almost like a summer canopy, but it's actually the solar panel. So then you have space underneath it. And I think potentially people are able to then use that almost like a canopy on their roof that they could actually go sit underneath because it's probably a good 7 feet tall, 8 feet tall.
In Austin, when I was at Fully Charged, I went to the public library there, which is astounding. If you ever want to do some sightseeing around Austin, there's a lot of really cool, sustainable green technology buildings. And the public library is one of them. And on the roof, there's like a roof deck that you can go out. And there's tables that you can sit at and work. And there's basically this gigantic canopy over a part of that roof that is basically just solar panels. And they're solar panels that are, I don't know the right term, but it's like transparent. So it's like the cell itself is black, but the space in between the cells is clear. So it still lets filtered light a little bit come through. But for the most part, it's creating shade, and it's just solar for the building. It's really, really, really cool.
So before we end, we can touch base on some of the things we've been watching and enjoying. And Matt, would you like to start us off?
Sure. I think you may have brought this up last time. The Haunting of Bly Manor.
Yes. Yes.
I started watching that a couple days ago. I've only watched 2 episodes. But instantly my wife and I were like, oh, we like this show. It's really, it's my kind of horror movie. It's like, it's not the kind, I'm horror show. It's not the kind of, there's no jump scares. It's all just about mood and tension and suspense. And there's always these like shots that linger really long that make you go, what am I supposed to be seeing in the background? Oh my God, is there something in the background? Is that a person? Oh no, it's just something on a shelf. Okay. Oh God. It's like, so yeah, exactly. So the show does that perfectly. And it's like, I have had in the first 2 episodes, like 3 or 4 times where I've gotten like shivers down my spine of like, oh my God, what's happening? Ah. It is the perfect, just spooky, tension-filled, perfect time for Halloween TV show to be watching. So and the characters are very compelling, and you immediately, just like the same cast from The Haunting of Hill House, the cast is so good, and like you immediately just identify with these characters, and you know who they are within minutes, and you just identify with them. And the kids are lovely. The little girl that's in this show is just adorable. And the kid, the little boy that plays the brother, he is endearing and terrifying at times.
Yeah. Very well directed.
Yeah.
The kids are very well directed so that they can be, and also the kids are also good actors. And so the kids become a mix of, oh, I wish I liked them.
Yes.
It's because there's something wrong. There's something going on, and
there's something. Yeah, there's something creepy. It's like the one thing in horror movies. It's like some of the scariest things in horror movies are children. I don't know why. Like characters walking through a dark, basement, and you hear like a little kid giggle in the background, and then scampering feet, and it's like it's terrifying.
I think we have a mythology. I think we've built up a mythology in our culture about the innocence of children.
Yeah,
they're natively good. They are natively pure. And there's a whole, that's a cultural assumption that's built around them. They are meant to be protected. They are good. And if somebody is malevolent, that is something that is the result of their childhood. That is not something that was present from birth. And there's a whole, there's a book that I looked at decades ago, which was basically the mythology of childhood and how the Victorian era began the era of constructing the idea that childhood was meant to be idyllic and protected. That prior to that, the assumptions about childhood was like, if you're born, you're now a human and life is tough. And so the idea of squalor and struggle and pain in childhood is something that is, from a human perspective, relatively recent.
Yeah.
And I think that horror also grew in the Victorian era. And I have a feeling it's the mirror side of that protectiveness is also then the pushing of those things in the other direction. Childhood is supposed to be pure. Horror is at the other end. So when you mix those two,
that's the contrast.
See the child in the horror, and that raises the specter of this is even more malevolent than just malevolent adults, because a malevolent child throws that entire worldview completely out the window. Yeah. If a child is malevolent, then the system is not working the way I thought it was, and I can't trust anything. And I think that's what's happening when we see stories of like Victorian era orphanages and the ghosts of the child, and you hear the scampering feet, and like all of that is just creepy, creepy, creepy.
Well, this show is doing a brilliant job of weaving between these kids are terrifying to these kids are trying to do the right thing, and actually they're trying to protect the adults. And then it goes back into the, or are they? Or like, it's like you keep weaving back and forth about how you feel about these children, because you feel for them at the same time you're terrified of them in different scenes. And the kids are really good. That little boy is surprisingly good in delivering a nuanced performance. And I really tip my hat to the director, because it's like, it's like, I don't know how many takes it took to get that, or how hard it was to get them to do that, but they've captured just the right performance from those kids. It's a really, really, really good show.
I agree. It's impressive to see a child do something that looks malevolent while the child is also giving the sidelong glance to the other kid that lets you know that they don't want to do what they're doing.
Yes.
And there's that moment of like, we know we have to do this, right? Yeah, I don't want to do it either. And then the lies that follow, and everybody knows that everybody's lying. It's just like, but what is happening? Yeah, it's a wonderful show. And I loved Hill House, but I agree. It strikes a different tone without the jump scares. It becomes just it's a powerful ghost story, which is different from saying that it is terrifying. It is.
Yeah, the Haunting of Hill House had a scene in a car.
That's the one I broke my foot to.
Yeah, it made me convulse, and my arms were flailing in the air like a freak. It had It didn't have a ton of them, but it did have jump scares. The movie The Grudge did that to me too. I was in a theater, and I remember there was a scene in that was such a horrible jump scare. Everybody in the audience like leapt all at once, but my arms went flying up. And then immediately afterwards, I started laughing uncontrollably at what I had just done, which then, of course, was very distracting to people around me. Yeah. But it's like, this show isn't doing that. This show is just giving me shivers and making me sit up straight in my seat at times, because it's just like, oh, this is so unbelievably tense right now, what I'm seeing on the screen. So I'm loving it. It's great.
I was going to talk about something that was a horror film, but as you were talking about the show that you've been watching, I decided to change exactly what I was going to be talking about. And initially I was going to talk about sort of the opposite end of horror from what you're describing, which was we've been rewatching the Scream films.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And it's been fun. They are we just watched Scream 4 the other night, and partway through it, we paused because popcorn had to be made. And my girlfriend said, so what do you think? She'd seen the movie before. I haven't seen it before. And I had some issues with some of the writing and some of the choices, but on the whole, it's just fun. It's just a fun popcorn film. So it's like, and they're smarter than a lot of films that are made in the same world, in the same world of horror. They're smarter than a lot of those. So I got a kick out of that. But then as you were talking, I thought about another thing that I could talk about, which is on Netflix, and it's called Session 9. And it is a movie that it's a strange film from the perspective of how it's filmed. It looks very much like it's filmed on high-res digital as opposed to being on film or having the look of most movies have a look about them. You know what I mean? Where it's the professional level of the filming. This looks a little bit more guerrilla film made. Like it was probably a cheaper production, probably didn't cost a lot of money to make. And it's a very small cast. And the actors in it, a couple of them have been, you recognize a couple of faces, but for the most part, it's like small character actors or people you haven't really seen before. One of the actors is a guy who's usually plays bullies in TV shows and stuff like that. But the setup is that there is an old psychiatric hospital. The building that they use is creepy as hell. I mean, it is really like these buildings exist. This abandoned psychiatric hospital may be a real place, but it's this abandoned psychiatric hospital has to have asbestos cleanup done before it can be reused. There's going to be a project to reuse this place, but they have to get the asbestos out first. And the movie starts with this team where one of the members of the team is things in his personal life. He's the head of this company, and he's basically got his back against the wall. His company is about to fold if he doesn't get work. So he really aggressively bids on this contract and makes promises that are going to be very hard to stand up to. So it's like, we can get this done in a week. And he brings in his crew, and they begin to experience things at the hospital. There are questions about like what happened here. And one of the crew members finds old tapes that are interview tapes with a patient. Somebody else is in a different area and they hear what sound like footsteps. There's questions about things that are being found around the building. And it is, I would say it's sort of similar to the TV show that you just described, in that it is largely, the horror comes from the long sustained silences and long shots of a dark hallway, a guy who is in a basement and they've had to set up a generator, and this guy goes deep into the basement and the generator dies and he's down in this basement. It's that kind of horror of like, is there something down there with him? The entire movie is kind of like if you took the final 10 minutes of Blair Witch Project and filmed an entire movie within that 10 minutes of, is there a malevolent thing here? Is what they're experiencing one person coincidentally losing their mind while other people are finding spooky things and it's just this one person is losing his mind? Or is it collective? Is something happening?
Right.
So session 9 it's a little over an hour and a half. And like I said, when you start watching it, it's a little bit like, oh, this is a little on the cheaper side, but it has that feeling of a very independent film that hit enough really strong notes that it got a wider release. And I think it was a film, if I remember correctly, I think it was a film that did really well at some film festivals, and then it got picked up for wider distribution. So it was the little engine that could sort of film. And at the end of it, I absolutely do recommend it. There were a few things that are like, oh, I think, if they'd done the little things here and there a little differently, they could have it could have been a little bit stronger in some places. But for what it is, I think it's a really fun and very perfect for this time of year, especially if you live in anywhere that is similar to like Western Mass. It's like, the sort of idyllic woods with this creepy hospital built in the middle of them. And the question of like, it's supposed to be lovely. It's supposed to be autumnal. It's supposed to be this supportive environment. It's supposed to be a hospital. And it turns out like there's something else happening here.
Yeah. I just looked it up, and it takes place in Danvers, Massachusetts. I used to live not far from there. So I might check this out. This also, I was just looking, came out in 2001, which is a couple years after the Blair Witch Project. So it strikes me, there was a whole bunch of like copycat films that came out after that were all this guerrilla filmmaking style, low budget, on video. So maybe that's why it has that video look, because at that time that was very popular for horror movies. And I was also just saw on the wiki page for this that it was one of the first films to be filmed in digital at 24 frames per second, which so it was kind of trying to mimic that film look without actually being film. So I thought that was interesting.
So everybody should let us know what they think. You can reach out to us on Twitter at StillTBDFM. You can reach out to me directly at by Sean Farrell, and Matt's available at Matt Farrell or at UndecidedMF. Please be sure to watch for the latest videos from Undecided with Matt Farrell on YouTube. You can find the podcast at stilltbd.fm, and you can subscribe to it through any major podcast providers like iTunes or Spotify. Please be sure to give the podcast a rating, a review, and share us with your friends, because it really does help the podcast. The podcast helps the channel helps Matthew, and then Matthew helps me keep the motion detector going. Thanks so much, everybody. We'll talk to you next time.